The night they locked her inside the shrine, not a single person in the village of Amafor believed she would survive till morning. And honestly, that was exactly what they were hoping for. But here is the thing about God, and about women who have suffered long enough. Sometimes, the very thing that was meant to destroy them becomes the door to their destiny. Let me tell you the story of Adaeze. And I want you to pay attention because everything in this story matters. Amafor was a village that sat between two hills in the eastern part of Nigeria. The kind of place where the morning air smelled of firewood and red earth, where palm trees lined the footpaths like old uncles who had seen too much. It was the kind of village that looked peaceful from the outside. Quiet roads, thatched rooftops, children chasing each other across dusty compounds. But underneath all that, there were rules, and those rules had teeth. The Igwe, the traditional ruler, was an old man whose word was the law. The elders sat under the udala tree every evening and decided the fate of others over palm wine and bitter kola. And the women were expected to be quiet, to carry load, to give birth, and to be grateful even for that. Adaeze was 32 years old, and she had been carrying load since she was 9. She lived in a one-room mud house at the edge of the village, not because she chose to, but because her husband Chukwuemeka died 3 years ago. His family took everything: the land, the furniture, the goats, even the children's school uniforms. They said it was tradition. They said a widow had no claim. They said she was lucky they did not throw her out completely. So she built herself a small life in what remained. Every morning before the cocks crowed, Adaeze would wake up, tie her wrapper tight across her chest, and walk 4 kilometers to the stream to fetch water. She would carry that clay pot on her head the same way she carried everything else in life, silently, steadily, without complaint. She farmed a small patch of yam behind her house. She wove baskets and sold them at the Eke market on Sundays. She fed her 2 children, a boy of 10 and a girl of 7, with whatever was left after she paid the landlord his rent. Nobody helped her. Nobody asked if she was fine. In Amafor, a widow who had no family money was invisible. She existed the way smoke exists, present but drifting, noticed only when she got in somebody's way. And she was always in somebody's way. It started with Mama Eze, the woman who sold palm oil 2 stores away from Adaeze at the market. Mama Eze had a tongue like a blade, and a group of women who gathered around her every market day like she was their television. One Sunday morning, Adaeze arrived at her stall and found that Mama Eze and her friends had spread their wares so wide they had blocked the entrance to Adaeze's space. "Excuse me," Adaeze said quietly, shifting one of the baskets out of her path. "And who gave you permission to touch my things?" Mama Eze said. Her friends laughed. "I only need to pass," Adaeze said. "Then find another way to pass." Mama Eze turned her back. "Useless widow. Even the space you use, someone else should be using. What do you even sell here? Baskets? Who buys baskets? You should be at home where widows belong." The women laughed again. The men nearby looked away. Adaeze stood there for a moment, her jaw tight, her eyes stinging. Then she picked up her baskets and squeezed herself through a narrow gap on the side as she went. She did not say a word. But she felt it. Every single word of it. She felt it the way you feel a stone inside your shoe. Small, but constant and exhausting. The humiliation did not stop at the market. In the village, Adaeze had become a kind of sport. When she walked past, some of the women would whisper loud enough for her to hear. They said she was cursed, that it was her fault her husband died. They told her children at school that their mother was a witch, until her son Obiara came home one afternoon with a busted lip from a fight he had picked because a classmate said that. She cleaned his lip with warm water and held him while he cried. She did not cry herself. She had no more tears for that kind of thing. She had used them all in the first year after Chukwuemeka died, lying on the floor of that mud house, praying for strength she wasn't sure would come. But the worst of it, the thing that truly broke something inside her chest, came from the Igwe's compound. There was a piece of land at the center of Amafor, a good piece of land sitting between the school and the main road, where a small building had once stood before it crumbled. Adaeze had gone to the Igwe's palace to ask if she could farm that land. She would pay whatever portion of the harvest was required. She had heard that the land was not being used and she needed more space to grow food. Her small patch behind the house was not enough. She dressed carefully that day. She wore her best blouse, the blue one she only brought out for occasions, and she tied her wrapper neatly. She combed her children's hair and left them with a neighbor. She walked to the palace and waited outside for 2 hours in the afternoon sun before an attendant came to ask what she wanted. She explained. The attendant went inside. He came back with a look on his face that told her everything before he opened his mouth. The Igwe says that land is not for widows. It is reserved for men with families. He says you should go back to your people's village if you cannot sustain yourself here. Adaeze stood very still. My children were born here, she said quietly. This is their father's village. I am not going anywhere. The attendant shrugged and went back inside. A group of young men lounging at the palace gate laughed at her. One of them called out something crude that made the others laugh harder. She walked away with her eyes straight ahead. That night, she sat outside her house and looked at the sky for a long time. She thought about her father, who died when she was 11. She thought about her mother, who sacrificed everything to send her to school. She thought about herself at 16, arriving in Amafor as a young bride, full of hope, convinced that love was enough to build a life on. She had been wrong about so many things. The real trouble began 2 weeks later when the oracle spoke. In Amafor, the shrine of Aja-Oma was considered sacred. It sat at the far end of the village, past the mango grove, surrounded by ancient Iroko trees whose roots buckled the ground like the knuckles of old men. Once a year, the chief priest, a thin, serious man named Dibia Okeke, would go into the shrine and emerge with a message from the ancestors. The whole village would gather. Whatever the oracle said became law. That year, the message was specific and terrifying. The ancestors were angry, Dibia Okeke announced. There was a woman in the village who carried dark energy, a woman whose presence was poisoning the land. The yams had been small that season. The river had flooded twice. 3 children had fallen sick in the same week. The ancestors had spoken. The woman must be identified and she must be sent into the shrine for 1 night to be judged. If she was innocent, she would emerge in the morning. If she was guilty, the ancestors would deal with her. Nobody said Adaeze's name out loud. Nobody had to. The whispers started that evening, and by the next morning, a delegation had assembled at her door. Mama Ize was there, 2 of the Igwe's attendants, 4 village elders, and a handful of women who had never said a good word about her in their lives. The oracle has spoken, said the eldest of the men, a grey-haired elder named Mazin Wofa. Adaeze looked at the crowd assembled outside her house. Her children were at school. She was grateful for that at least. What proof do you have? She asked. The ancestors do not need proof, Mazin Wofa said. Their word is proof. And if I refuse, she said, then you will be driven out of this village before nightfall and your children with you. She looked at Mama Ize, whose face was barely hiding its satisfaction. She looked at the others. She thought of Obiara and her daughter Chisom, thought of pulling them out of school, of walking out of the village with nowhere to go, no money, nothing. She looked back at Mazin Wofa and said quietly, calmly, in a voice that did not shake even though every part of her wanted to collapse, I will go. They came for her at sunset. They walked her through the village like a procession of judgment. People came out of their houses to watch. Some looked uncomfortable and said nothing. Most watched with a detached curiosity of people watching something they had already decided was not their problem. And a few of the younger women looked at her with something that might have been guilt, but they did not speak. Adaeze walked with her head up. She had bathed carefully. She wore the same blue blouse she had worn to the Igwe's palace. She was not going to let them see her crawl. The shrine was dark and smelled of earth and old incense. Dibia Okeke stood at the entrance with his staff and his chalk markings. He said some words in the old language. Then the door was pulled open and Adaeze was guided inside. The door swung shut behind her. She heard the heavy wooden bolt slide across from outside. And then she was alone. The darkness inside the shrine was total at first. She stood completely still, letting her eyes adjust, letting her heart beat slow. Slowly, through a small gap near the ceiling, the dying light of the evening seeped in, enough to see dim shapes. There was a clay pot in the corner, a sleeping mat on the floor, an old oil lamp unlit, and on a ledge near the wall, something that made her breath catch. A book. Old, worn, its cover dark with age. She crossed to the ledge and picked it up. Even in the dim light, she could see writing on the first page. She turned it toward the gap in the ceiling and read. And then she sat down very slowly on the mat because what she held in her hands changed everything. The book was a record of the shrine going back generations, written in a mix of old Igbo and English, the English added in later years by someone educated, and buried in those pages in faded ink that she had to strain to read was a name she knew. Her mother's name, Ngozi Adaeze, born in Amafor, daughter of Eze-Ama the Great, the man who built this shrine 3 generations ago, the man who had donated the land on which Amafor School now stood, the man whose family had been given a covenant, written and witnessed by 6 elders and sealed by the oracle itself, that no member of his bloodline could ever be judged by the shrine, because they were, by ancient custom, the shrine's protectors, its guardians. Her mother had left Amafor as a young girl after her parents died. She had never told Adaeze about any of this. Perhaps she had not known. Perhaps she had known and believed it was too far in the past to matter. Perhaps she had thought her daughter would never need it. Adaeze sat in the darkness with the book in her hands, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something she had almost forgotten the taste of: power. She spent the rest of that night reading every page she could in the thin light from the ceiling gap. She committed what she needed to memory, and then she set the book carefully back on the ledge, folded her hands in her lap, and waited for morning with the stillness of someone who already knew how the story ended. At dawn, when the bolts scraped back and the door swung open, Mazi Nofo and the other elders expected to find one of 2 things: a woman broken by fear and ready to confess to anything, or a woman who had not survived the night. What they found was Adaeze standing in the doorway of the shrine, calm and dry-eyed, the morning light falling on her like she belonged in it. A murmur went through the crowd that had gathered. Mazi Nofo stepped forward. "You survived." "I did." "Then the ancestors have judged." "The ancestors have judged nothing," Adaeze said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. "This shrine had no authority over me from the beginning, and you know why." Mazi Nofo frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Bring Dibia Okeke," she said. "Bring him now, and bring the Igwe, because what I'm about to say must be heard by everyone who matters in this village." They brought him. It took time because nobody quite understood what was happening, but the crowd had grown large enough and the mood strange enough that the Igwe himself came, carried in his chair by attendants, his ceremonial staff across his lap, his expression irritated and imperious. "What is the meaning of this?" the Igwe demanded. Adaeze turned and walked back into the shrine. She returned carrying the book. She held it up. "This is the original record of Aja-Oma shrine, written by my great-grandfather's hand, Eze-Ama the Great, the man who founded this shrine and donated the land that your school stands on. The man your own ancestors made a covenant with, a covenant that is recorded on page 7 of this book and witnessed by 6 names that I will read out if anyone wishes to challenge me." Complete silence. Even the birds seemed to stop. She opened the book to the relevant page and read the covenant aloud. She read it slowly and clearly. She read the 6 names of the witnessing elders. She read the language of the covenant, that no blood of Eze-Ama's line could be judged, imprisoned, or condemned by this shrine, for they were its protectors, not its subjects. Dibia Okeke had gone the color of ash. His staff wavered in his hand. "My mother was Ngozi Adaeze. Her father was Chukwudi Adaeze, son of Eze-Ama the Great. I am Eze-Ama's great-granddaughter. I am not a subject of this shrine. I am its rightful custodian." She closed the book. "You locked me inside my own inheritance, and now I want answers. Not for me alone, for every woman in this village who has been judged by a system that was never built to judge them fairly." What happened next was the kind of thing a village will remember for 100 years. The Igwe, for the first time anyone can recall, descended from his chair without being helped. He walked to where Adaeze stood and looked at the book himself, at the names, at the covenant language, at the signature of an ancestor he had grown up hearing stories about. His hands were not entirely steady. He asked, why did nobody know of this? His voice had lost its authority. He sounded old, just old. Adaeze said, because it was convenient not to know. Not with bitterness, just with the plain clarity of someone who has had 3 years to understand exactly how the world works. A poor widow with no family connections was a much easier target than the truth. Mama Ize, who had been standing near the front of the crowd with her arms folded, had now taken several steps back and was trying to disappear into the group. It was not working. Several people had already turned to look at her. It was one of the younger elders, a man named Obenna, who had always seemed slightly less comfortable with the group's cruelty than the others, who spoke first. "Ne," he said to Adaeze, using the respectful term for an older woman, his voice thick with what might have been shame. "We did not know. We were told." "You were told what you wanted to believe," she said. But her voice was not angry. She was tired of anger. Anger takes too much from you. What matters now is what we do going forward. What they did going forward was this. The Igwe called a formal assembly, the first of its kind in 15 years, and the record book was presented before the entire village. A wealthy elder from a neighboring town was brought in to verify the authenticity of the document. He confirmed it within an hour. The covenant was real. The bloodline was traceable. Adaeze was exactly who the pages said she was. As the descendant of the shrine's founder, she was entitled by Amafor's own ancient customs to 3 things: a seat on the Council of Elders, stewardship of the shrine lands, and a formal public acknowledgement of any wrong done to her by the community. The Igwe gave her all 3. He did it publicly, in front of everyone, sitting in his chair with his staff across his lap, his expression irritated and imperious. He said the village had failed her. He said that what had been done to her, the years of dismissal, the shrine incident, the denial of the central farmland, all of it was a shame on Amafor. And he said it in front of Mazi Nofo and Mama Ize and every person who had looked away when she needed someone to look toward her. Nobody clapped. It was too heavy a moment for clapping. People just stood there, holding the weight of it. Mama Ize came to her a week later. She came in the evening when the market was closed and the compound was quiet. She brought a small pot of ofe onugbu soup, the kind made with crayfish and stockfish, the kind you bring when you know words are not enough. She stood at her door and did not say anything for a long moment. She finally said, "I know what I did. I know." Adaeze looked at her for a long time. Then she opened the door wider and nodded toward the inside. "Come and sit." That was all she said. That was enough, because Adaeze had not come through what she came through by holding bitterness like a stone in her chest. She had survived on something lighter than that, a kind of quiet, stubborn insistence on remaining herself, on refusing to let anyone else's cruelty rewrite the story of who she was. She took the farmland. She planted it the following season with groundnuts and cassava and the tall green vegetables that her mother used to grow, teaching her children the names of each plant the way her own mother had taught her. She took her seat on the council. It was the first woman to sit there in 20 years. She did not speak loudly or try to overturn everything at once. She asked questions. She pointed out things that others had stopped noticing. Slowly, in the way that real change always moves, quietly, steadily, stubbornly, she began to shift things. The widow who was invisible became the woman everyone came to when they needed something sorted. The woman whose children were mocked at school became the woman whose son eventually won a state scholarship. The woman they locked in a shrine became the woman who 3 years later stood at the official rededication of that same shrine, now preserved as a heritage site, with her name and her great-grandfather's name and the covenant all inscribed on a plaque mounted at the entrance. She stood there on that afternoon with Obiara on one side and Chisom on the other, the sun warm on her face. The village gathered around her, many of the same faces that had walked her to that shrine in judgment. And she felt something she could not quite name, not triumph exactly, not revenge, something quieter and more complete than either of those things. She felt like herself, like the fullness of herself, finally, after so many years of being shrunk. The lesson of Adaeze is not that suffering always gets rewarded. It does not always. The lesson is not that your enemies will always be exposed. Sometimes they are not. The lesson of Adaeze is simpler and harder than either of those things. It is this: carry yourself carefully, even when they are trying to break you, because you never know what is waiting inside the very thing they use to try to destroy you. You never know what your own name holds. You never know whose blood runs in your veins and what that blood has already built. They locked her in the shrine. They did not know the shrine was hers.